Assalamu alaikum. So we had been discussing I wrote an article the other day trying to make this coherent. Wrote a short little post, and I was quoting something from a Western academic. He's a scholar in the field of sociology, and he coined this term called the problems of meaning, right? The problems of meaning. And his definition was, it's a, quote, a pervasive uncertainty regarding ultimate beliefs and values, confusing images of self, society and nature, and the ceaseless conflict over the ends, rules, and norms in terms of which personal and collective life is organized and legitimated. All right, well, it's an academic paper, right? So essentially what he's saying is that, out of the European Enlightenment, right, as Dr. Jackson had said, right, Europe had a particular history with religion. And because of that particular history that the Europeans had, and then as they became a colonizing force, they were able to press upon those that they subjugated, colonized. They were able to press upon them their conclusions about, what religion is, and particularly, let's say, bad, right? Because of the way that religion unfolded in Europe. And that in modern times, this has created some issues. And I said, for the black community in particular, just coming off of the 2018 Blackamerican Muslim Conference, I was saying that one of the challenges that I see Black American Muslims have is sort of double, right? Because throughout history, or at least our history here in this country, it's like we're always having to push back against how we are defined by those other than us, right? Particularly whites. But then to co-opt and adopt a religion that is essentially historically not a part of the European and certainly the American European experience en masse, like as a group. I'm not talking about individual conversions. This has created a challenge for us because, to be quite honest, it's like we're never quite sure, right, who we are. So when it comes to, or rather it has indeed created, right, this pervasive sense of uncertainty, like about, what are ultimate truths for Muslims, right? What are our beliefs? What are our values? And even what's our image, right? Like, as black people in America, what is our image, right? If you're wearing a hoodie, right, is your image that of a thug, right? Is that, so there's that confusing self-image of you're constantly told, or particularly for black women, right, with hair, you're not beautiful, meeting certain standards, right? So there's that one challenge, but then we come into the Muslim community, in our interaction with the Muslim community in America, that not only has its own sort of version of white aspirationalism, but then has its own versions of what it considers to be ultimate beliefs and values and so on, right? So we have this double problem of trying to, right, being caught often between the two of these. And for a lot of youth, because it was posed as one of the Q&A questions by an audience member, why is there such a drain from the masajid from black youth, black Muslim youth? I kind of looked to Seidman's paper here that's titled "Modernity and the Problem of Meaning," the Durkheimian tradition. But he is astute here in pointing out that, this process of secularization and this process coming out of the Enlightenment and its views about religion and how people are now socialized into that, quite frankly, for a lot of black Muslim youth, they're just not sure what is ultimate belief. you got, Sufi and Salafi and all this other stuff, but then you've got other elements. Of course, you've got the Christian element of Black America. You have Pan-Africanism, right? So it can be quite a challenge for youth, especially if they're in a space where they don't already feel welcome. It'll be difficult to determine, right, ultimate beliefs and values, as well as a confusing self-image. But he also goes on to lay out something very important too, right? And that I think we really are suffering the consequences now of not having fully developed an American Muslim culture, especially in Black America, because one thing that Black Americans have done very well in America, despite centuries of oppression, violence, is build culture. We are the cultural builders in America. As I sit here and listen to my felonious monk, we are the cultural builders, right? And in some of these either like proto-Islamic groups or whatnot, it seemed like they were on the verge of trying to do that, and that's why they had some of their successes. They were able to create a sort of subculture within the dominant culture, of which they could, as a group, espouse and create, right, their own ultimate beliefs, define their character and their morals and their values for themselves, define their own self-image in a way that was meaningful and empowering to them, despite whatever the dominant culture may thought of it. But then all of that seemed to crumble and fall apart as Black American Muslims left these heretical groups, right, and came into so-called Orthodox Islam. We seem to backslide on this. And now we have this problem that Seidman says that is really worth paying attention to. He says, in pre-modern societies, the perception of being situated in a socio-cultural order expressive of the natural or cosmic order legitimated culturally expressed patterns of meaning. Hang with me. In such an authoritative manner that whenever stirrings of collective existential or moral doubt were felt, they were contained from erupting into a full-blown cultural crisis. If identity, moral coherence, and social integration were experienced as problems in pre-modern societies, it was either during times of crisis or confined to individuals on the social periphery. So let's break this down a little bit, right? So in pre-modern societies, right, we live now in modernity or post-modernity, whichever one you want to choose. This was the function of, like, when he's saying here social cultural, we could say like religion and culture, social and culture, right? That's the power that cultural had, was essentially to reinforce a sort of, to the average person living in that society, it reinforced on an ambient level what the nature of reality was, right? That, there's a creator, right? So, or maybe more particularly in the Muslim context, right? That Allah is La ilaha illahu, right? Allah is the creator of the heavens and the earth, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, was his prophet and messenger. So, that part it sort of reinforces that on a cultural level, that the average person doesn't have to do a whole lot of thinking. It's just like, yeah, I'm Muslim, you're Muslim, we're Muslim. Even if those people aren't Muslim, like, we know who we are, we know what they are, and this is generally the cosmic order of things. And therefore, if there was some type of challenge to come along, right, that might challenge Muslim belief, it would kind of come and go, or the intellectuals, the scholars might respond to it, but it wouldn't fall to the laity, one, to try to respond to these things that they're not equipped to. And therefore, he said, like, you know, whatever existential or moral doubts that these challenges might present, right? It kept it from affecting the society as a whole, right? And now bringing this down to a somewhat smaller scale, because we're now, the Muslim community is essentially a society within a greater society, but nonetheless, we need to think about how we can stop having every little thing erupt and cause like a crisis, right? So, I mean, good examples of this is like homosexuality, feminism, right? Instead of having well-trained and articulate scholars, not reactionary, right, respond to these things in a simple way so that the rest of us can just go about our lives and live out our lives as functional Muslims, right? Because of this hyper-reactionary way, it rocks us to the core. Like every little thing rocks our community to the core. We've also created, I think, as Dr. Jackson, I think in one of his speeches or something, referred to as sort of gotcha Islam, right? An Islam where, people's frailties as human beings, sinning, making mistakes, right? That there's not really a sense of mercy or rahmah in our community, and that only reinforces this tendency of the crisis to be felt not just simply on the individual level, but again rocking the community right to its core. This is really, really, really problematic, right? And that, yes, maybe in a time of crisis, right, like the Mongol invasion, okay, that's a time of crisis, right? And that's understandable, right? But the rest of this stuff, like, and I don't mean this, but just so for sake of argument, like whether it's, homosexuality, feminism, whatever these things are, right? Let that stuff just exist on the periphery, right? So for young Muslims, they're not allowed to, we only, it's like there is no periphery anymore in the Muslim community. There's only, right, this tiny little shell of like ultra hardcore religious pietistic people, and everybody else gets banished, right? And we're doing a very good job of reinforcing that, ourselves now. So it really shows that, we need to take a step back from all of this hyper-reactionary stuff and need to return to a principled way of engaging. People in leadership, in intellectual positions, need to step up to the plate. They need to get conversant with these things and have principled and nuanced responses to them. An answer to an ism isn't another ism, right? So, an answer to feminism isn't some sort of Islamic anti-feminism or whatever. It's just, we need to have a more principled, nuanced response. It doesn't mean that, and I'm very honest, like, it doesn't mean we're going to agree, right, with everything. We might very well be some things we ardently disagree about some of the claims that feminism makes, right? Just as an example, right? I mean, I personally am not all that hyper obsessed about feminism. But I think, it really shows that that's where we're at. We're in this place now that instead of allowing individual Muslims to have their frailties, right, but building a stronger core and expanding that out and allowing there to be a periphery in our community where not everybody is perfect. Now, like, it seems like on a weekly basis, there's like some new scandal or something. People are tearing themselves apart. People are tearing other people apart. And, we really desperately need to come up with a new system of engaging with one another and with other Muslims. So we'll continue the conversation.